Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. I'm your host, George Kirk, joined by the fantasy godfather himself, Marcus. You and I haven't done a show yet together, so how you doing?
Good. How are you, George? Congratulations on getting hitched.
Thank you. A little bit of an injured wing, but yeah, it's we're hanging in over here. Nah, it's a wrist injury. I'm questionable, but I'm active here because I'm here. So
Well, that's good. I'm glad to have you back. Great. Excited to do a show with you finally, buddy.
excited to have you here as well. Cody obviously not here for the day, but he will be back with me on Thursday. And if you want to follow along, we are live Monday and Thursdays at 6:30. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube, or follow us Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at the Couch GMs. If you are live, drop us a comment. We'll answer some questions on the air as we go along here. And you can always drop questions in our DMs, and we will answer them to help you out with your fantasy teams, talk trash, talk about the NFL, whatever you want to do. But in the meantime, Marcus, why don't we just sit back, relax, and chat? I'm absolutely impressed that these transitions have been as good as they have. I have not done this in so long. This is Cody's job, but I'm here and we're working it.
You're working good. Working good.
I know. I just want to start our conversation about week 5 with a conversation that you guys actually had last Monday, you and Cody. We were talking about tight ends and how tight ends are really being frustrating this year. And Cody argues that they should be out of that position should be out of fantasy football. And then they go on to have their best week of the entire season. We actually had more than 10 tight ends break 10 points. We had a couple break 20. I just wanted to welcome you into the Couch GMs where like we make these big claims and then all of a sudden everything goes backwards.
Well, to be fair, I'll still stick by my guns and say that they're unbelievably frustrating this year. You still had a lot of your premier tight ends coming up short, or in the case of Mark Andrews, where he has a big gainer, gets down within the 5, and then of course the touchdown goes to who else? Likely, nope, Charlie Kolar. So it just gets even more frustrating in Baltimore in terms now Kolar is going to start hawking touchdowns. It's going to be just one of those seasons. I do think you have some tight ends that are getting healthy. Evan Ingram is supposed to be back next week. You saw David Njoku return this week. So you're starting to get some bodies back. Maybe it becomes a little bit clearer. But I understand Cody's point to this. It's so unbelievably frustrating. And yet year after year, it's so difficult to predict really who those elite tight end options are. And after last year, it really seemed like we thought coming into the season, you had a clear list of who your elite tight ends were going to be. I hate to say that the position is fixed. My gut tells me that we go right back this week to those frustrating performances and letdowns, but maybe we'll be wrong because I could really use it. So we'll see how it shakes out.
Just to add extra emphasis, like it wasn't just even the top 10 that we thought we had in that tight end. We're like, oh, even like 11 through 16 are solid tight ends, and they haven't been doing well either. Meanwhile, not only did Charlie Kolar get a touchdown, Isaiah Likely got 2. So Mark Andrews owners out there, I am sorry. At least you also drafted Isaiah Likely. Hopefully you're playing him instead of Andrews, as he's been more consistent.
I started Andrews last week, but now I think I'm going to have to go with Likely. It's so difficult. You go off of how that offense was run in the past, and it was, Mark Andrews was the premier tight end. And the reason I drafted Likely was I figured, okay, until the late round bye, my team would be set, because if something did happen to Andrews, then Likely would step in. Now they're in this mired mess of who knows what tight end's going to get the targets. And at least in the early, indications, it's likely that is getting the touchdowns. And I really thought I was secure there. And it just turned out to be a situation where they're not even, in the top. Maybe they're in the top 10 because tight end's so barren, but it's not a promising start for that position for me.
It's not a promising start for pretty much anybody. So it's all good. Unless you went out and drafted Brock Bowers, I think you're really panicking. So We're going to talk later when we get to our waiver wire to figure out whose tight end points we should chase this week. In the meantime, we can just jump into just some of the games in week 5 because there were so many insane games, insane touchdowns. We had Lamar fumbling a snap and throwing a ridiculous touchdown to Likely. We had probably the shortest pick 6 of the season, the longest pick 6 of the season, the longest fumble 6 of the season. Just name a few plays. Is there any game you want to start off on just talking about how this week went?
I want to talk about our game this week, and not because it's the Commanders. What I want to talk about is the Cleveland Browns. And, if we have any Cleveland Brown fans that are watching the show, I feel for you. This was the first time I'd really gotten to see a very long, extended look at Deshaun Watson. And I don't understand how this man is still in the NFL. I'm not saying it would have changed the outcome incredibly, but at least a dozen times he is missing wide open wide receivers. He does not look comfortable in the pocket. He doesn't look like he belongs in the NFL. And the fact that you already have the coach of the Browns coming out and saying, we're not looking at making a quarterback change, it really makes you, in terms of fantasy, come back and really start to question, can you use the running game? Whether it's, Chubb coming back using Ford. What about the pieces there? We talked about Njoku. Also, a lot of people really started or wanted to depend on Amari Cooper this year. And okay, yeah, he's going to have a game here and there where he blows up. But in terms of a consistent fantasy producer, it's just not going to happen with Watson at quarterback, at least the way he's playing right now. It's baffling to me. It's a shame for the city of Cleveland and the fans around the U.S. and the world. They are maybe the inept franchise now in the NFL. I can't believe that you are, whatever the reason is, that you're sticking with a guy who just cannot play the position.
It was already controversial enough how they went out and traded for him and signed him to the only ever fully guaranteed contract in NFL history, and all the other things that came with him that I'm not even going to mention at this point. The fact that, now I don't know if it's an ownership thing as the reason why they're not considering a quarterback change, because there's a lot of money still invested in him and all that, but you're doing absolutely nothing. It looks like this is the ownership group of a team that you were mentioning, like the Commanders, where it's like they're kind of here to get the money. They're going to put a product out there that's subpar. They don't care. It feels like we're in that exact situation in Cleveland. And it's even worse looking at the Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield, who they had in-house, decided not to resign. Baker lost in overtime, and it doesn't matter. He's looked fantastic this year. And the Browns would starve for Baker Mayfield back.
It really just comes down to, like I said, if there's anyone who understands a franchise that's gone through some really boneheaded things, it's Commander fans. But I'll tell you right now, the Browns right now will go down in history synonymous with the worst move ever made in the NFL franchise. You pointed it out exactly. One, bringing in somebody with his checkered past and issues, to the contract, to the amount they gave up for him, and then to the product that he put on the field. This has just been an absolute zero over move. It's really a shame. And believe me, let's move on, because I'll tell you, the Browns don't deserve to be talked about any more than what we've already given them. So
no, definitely not. So go ahead.
I was going to say, now in that division, though, might be the offensive game of the year so far. The Ravens and Bengals. Wow, what an offensive thriller. Points all the way around. If you had anybody, for the most part, in this game, unless it was Zach Moss, you ended up on the positive side. So, what were your thoughts there? The sad part about this is an incredible offensive explosion, but the Bengals come out on the losing end again. Is Cincinnati in trouble?
I think there's a lot of positive signs that Cincinnati has been showing over the last few weeks. I mean, you got to think they are icing their holder away from winning this game, and we're not talking any problems with the Bengals. They're at 2-3, and I mean, obviously not great, but they're on the plus side of coming back up. And then you're also looking at the Ravens, like, oh, they're still 2-3, and they're behind the Steelers and on pace with the Bengals. This is a problem. They're that missed field goal away from that. So They traditionally have started slow. They also had the Higgins injury. He didn't get a lot of time in camp. They had the Chase contract situation. He didn't get a lot of time in camp. Like, I think that we're seeing them start to come back into form, and I can't fault them for losing to the Ravens. I mean, it was a very ugly way to lose, but they lost to a quality opponent. So it's not like they went out and pulled this against, I don't know, the Browns,
Yeah.
for a great example. So that doesn't concern me for the long term, but it does concern me that now you're in such a hole and have a loss to a key divisional opponent where you're probably looking at having to play a wild card game away.
So it's interesting that you bring that up about their off season, because again, talk about an organization and how you prepare properly. That's a good point. Has this been their preseason essentially?
I think the
Because
first month was, yeah.
you have, Higgins, who, whether he actually was injured or it had something to do with, being franchise tagged. But the bigger point to this is going to be is they haven't solved anything for the long term. So what's actually going on in Cincinnati if they continue down this path, whether it's warranted or not? They say they miss the playoffs, say they end up with a top 10 pick. I mean, right now they have the number 2 pick. If the season ended today, do we potentially see kind of a cleaning of the house, a reshuffling in Cincinnati?
I don't think it's going to be a complete cleaning of the house. You're not going to see Higgins come back for sure. Like, I think there's a chance if they're competitive, they find a way to hold on to him. Like things like that would change, but I don't see any way they move on from Chase. There's no way they move on from Burrow. It'll just be more of the complementary pieces as they do a little bit of like a reshuffle. I
Yeah.
wouldn't even call it a retool.
I just think it's one of those. I think me and Cody have talked about this in previous shows. I think we have a very interesting kind of landscape that's shaping up right now because, like you said, I don't think any of us think T. Higgins is coming back to Cincinnati. So say they lose next week. Why are you not trying to shop him? We
Yeah.
talked about the crazy concept about Tyreek Hill in Miami, sending him back to Kansas City. Again, if Miami keeps losing, do you look to move him? Amari Cooper, like there are names that are out there. We already know Devontae Adams is pounding his chest and begging to get out of Las Vegas. There are names that are out there that could dramatically change the landscape of some of the offensive structures of these teams.
The biggest reason why I think Higgins is in a different level. I mean, you're talking about the Raiders, Gardner Minshew. The
Yes.
Dolphins may never have Tua again. Like, none of them teams have Burrow. You got to think like it's ugly right now, but it's not over. If they catch fire at the right time, they would not be the only wild card team ever that had a chance to run a Super Bowl. Like, they just have at this point, they just got to buckle down, try to get back to 500 and focus on making a run at a wild card. And it's not where this team's expectations were this year, but it's not over because this is still a team that has the chance to make a run at the Chiefs in the AFC. That's the big reason why I think they wouldn't give up on T. Higgins that quickly.
No, I get what you're saying there, but it's going to be interesting because you've seen it happen in the past. These seasons can slip away pretty quick. So despite them coming on and playing a hell of a game this past week, I am a little worried and concerned that Cincinnati's going to start to falter a little bit. They've already talked about the coach being on the hot seat. So,
Which I could see that if this keeps getting uglier, I could see that being a thing. And also, obviously, we still have a couple weeks till the trade deadline too. What, a month and a half, maybe? A
yeah,
little
it's
bit
end
before
of November,
Thanksgiving.
I believe. So,
So there's a lot of things that can change. If they still have 3-4 wins by the trade deadline, that my whole conversation here about holding on to T. Higgins to make a run is pretty much irrelevant at that point. We
good
could see
point.
something completely different.
Yeah. So,
um, the other game of the year was happening at the same time, and it was interesting. I have this on the big screen in my house as Bree's watching, Ravens Bengals, and I look on the side and Red Zone every 2 seconds is on Colts Jags. What a game that was. As much as no one cares about the Colts and Jags right now, what was that?
you know, me and we brought it up with the Colts. Are the Colts better with Flacco? And is that a better solution for them to, use the veteran QB. Let's be honest. A lot of their offensive pieces seemed a lot better in terms of fantasy viability.
Mhm.
Multiple wide receivers. You didn't have your premier elite running back, but yet Sermon still had a serviceable week. And, the downside to it on the flip side is the Jags. What we saw there is the Colts defense is not very good. And unfortunately, the Jacksonville Jaguars can't play them every week. But, for at least 1 week, Christian Kirk put up some points. And, Brian Thomas, currently the top performing rookie wide receiver.
Who guessed that?
And who's talking about it? That's the other thing.
Yeah.
So, we'll get to it under waivers, but I mean, that guy's still out there in some leagues. And that's baffling. You have to pay attention to who is doing what. And, it's just because it's a name you don't recognize or a household name, it doesn't mean that it's not somebody that could help your team out. So, yeah, it was an incredible game. Like I said, for 1 week, the Jaguars, helped keep their coach's job. I still think he's got the hottest seat out of everybody.
Yes.
And, we'll see where that goes. Like I said, unfortunately, the Colts and Jags can't play every week. And if I remember correctly, I believe the Jags are the next team to travel across the pond, correct?
They are. They are one of the
So,
teams going to London next week. I feel like this has been the question going around, and I don't know if you've answered it yet. Does Doug Peterson make it back to Philly in week 9?
ooh. Well, okay. So for starters, it is beneficial for them to play over in London. That essentially is their home stadium. So,
That's fair.
that should work to their advantage. Maybe they come back. Look, Jacksonville has enough talent on that team to be competitive week in and week out. Hopefully, they started to figure out some things that work. And I really do believe that Evan Ingram getting back on the field is going to help immensely. I don't think he gets enough credit for helping make that offense go. Again, not a big touchdown guy, but definitely a PPR monster. Definitely the safety net for Lawrence. So that might be a big boost to what they're doing there as well. I think he does. I think he will be there when they face Philly in week 9.
I think you're the only one on the show that hasn't answered it yet, so I had to ask you. It's a
All
pretty
right,
interesting one.
I think he'll be there.
Yeah. But definitely keep an eye on Brian Thomas. And to answer your question you kind of threw out there at the beginning, I do think this Colts offense is better with Joe Flacco. You can't tell me that these wide receivers not producing, and then all of a sudden Joe Flacco comes in and they start producing and he goes 33 of 44 for 359 and 3 touchdowns. I don't care that he was facing the Jags. That's not easy.
I think, we talked about it in a previous show, and I think this week proved it. I think Anthony Richardson has taken a big step back, and I really think it would benefit him to slowly come back from this injury and maybe spend some time holding a clipboard, hopefully help the game slow down a little bit, because he does not look like the same quarterback that he was last year. He doesn't look explosive. He looks super indecisive. And that's definitely affecting what his availability is to have a high functioning offense. So, if it's working with Flacco right now, let it go. Let him learn a little bit. Did the Colts think they're winning a Super Bowl this year?
Because
You
they
know what I
shouldn't
mean?
be.
Correct. So,
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of times they say if you put a rookie in and pull him out and put him in, I don't think this really hurts him, because again, you're not benching him. You're letting him come back. Again, I keep using air quotes. You're letting him slowly come back from the injury. He'll serve in an emergency capacity, whatever. But, I'm not saying the whole season, but give him a stretch of, 3 or 4 weeks where he's watching, and then see how the team plays out. And again, if all of a sudden they won 3-4 weeks in a row, you can't bench Flacco.
Exactly. And I think as the NFL has kind of evolved over the years, you have a young quarterback. There's more and more times where they're being rushed in and then they're being rushed out as well.
Correct.
And the Packers fan's not here, but the Packers fan can attest to letting a quarterback sit and learn and let the game slow down and then go out there and get your reps after.
Correct.
And no one wants to hear that soft benching that you're talking about. It's not really a benching, but just, letting him study behind a veteran quarterback. But I think that might be the best move for him long term, especially as we're looking at him just getting beat up over and over because he's overcompensating with his legs when he needs to learn how to use the pass game to protect himself.
Correct. But, here's the thing for any Colts fan that's listening to this or anybody who's, whether it's fantasy, whether it's just the fan of the team, would you rather have him sit and learn? And I understand that's not ideal. Or do you want him to flame out? Do you put him
Yeah.
back out there? He flames out. We've seen it. Look at what happened to Baker Mayfield. Baker
Mhm.
Mayfield couldn't produce in Cleveland, and he was discarded as trash. He's now one of the top fantasy quarterbacks this year and has a team being extremely competitive in his division. Again, you threw away something too soon, and we see that happen. How often do these quarterbacks not get the time to learn? We expect, especially first rounders, we expect them to immediately pay dividends. And if they don't, well, then they're a failure. We seem to
Yeah.
forget 20, 30 years ago, quarterbacks they might not even gotten a chance to start until they were close to 30 because benches were so deep. You had veterans there. It took injuries, it took weird circumstances to happen. So
And
again,
that's not even the only example. Geno Smith in Seattle. He
correct.
sat forever. Sam Darnold's having the year of his life. He was on 3 different teams.
Well, maybe not this past week. He
Well,
struggled a little bit,
yeah,
but he
fair.
got a W,
He did. Exactly. But
So
there's multiple examples of this. So I'm interested to see how this Anthony Richardson thing shakes out. But in the meantime, that was a fantastic game this past week. Colts couldn't quite pull it out. Props to the Jags. NFC West had a very interesting one, though. San Francisco 49ers get out to a lead, look like they're going to cruise on the Cardinals. Cardinals defense, second half shutout, comeback win over the division rival. I don't know if a lot of people were paying attention to this the way I was, just because, the 1 o'clock window is so crazy and there's so many ridiculous plays. But this game was intriguing to me on seeing how the 49ers are just not quite in rhythm yet.
I think so many people just automatically assume they give the benefit of the doubt to the Kyle Shanahans, to the Sean McVays, that it doesn't matter who you have there, what pieces you put in, that's going to create success and wins. And I think this was a good example that the 49ers by far are not a bad team, but they're beatable, especially when you're looking at division games. I always say it doesn't matter who it is in a division, you're flipping a coin. Teams are more amped up for these games. They mean more, whatever the reasoning is. And you'll get all the coach speak. You'll get the players to be like, oh, every game's the same. We take a game one at a time. I don't think any of us believe that. When the Giants are on the schedule for the Eagles, we know that means more. We know how many times is the Deshaun Jackson punt referenced, and we talk about, the team killers and things like that always seem to have these incredible weeks against their rival teams. I do believe that the interesting thing about this is what you said. It was the defense that won this game.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cardinals right now kind of have this no-name defense. And when Washington played them, when I've watched a couple of their games, they might not be the elite blue chip talent, but what they have is a lot of players who play with a lot of energy and a lot of speed. You have Mac that's there. You have I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher this guy's name. Buda Baker, and then I've lost it. So
No,
that's
you're
never
all good.
good. That's never
Kaiser
good
White,
radio.
somebody I've always looked at as just played with
Kaiser
high
White.
energy.
Um,
Zaven Collins, Sean Murphy Bunting has been all over the place, but he's always been somebody that always pops up in the game whenever he plays.
yeah.
I know it's not here. No, none of these guys are the guys you're mentioning. I'm just trying to think of who I'm thinking of on their defense.
But my point though is these guys are just flying around the ball. And that to me, that creates plays. Now, it does also mean they're going to have weeks where they're going to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to get beat because, again, it's not necessarily the sound defensive, It's effort, but effort plays so much in regards to getting these games, these last minute games, and getting the turnovers, and players, we talk about all the time, players stepping up. And that's what matters. You have to have these people that when you need a playmate are going to make a play. Buda Baker's been doing it for years for them. And, now where you have, some of these other players, you said Zaven Collins, who's kind of been their linchpin. You have these guys they're buying into a defense, and they basically took one of the top offenses out of the game.
Mm-hmm. And this isn't the beat up Niners offense that we saw a few weeks ago either. Like Debo was held to one catch. Ayuk finally had his breakout game, and I actually wanted to talk fantasy spin on this one. Like, are we more comfortable with Ayuk after seeing him finally play? And then obviously Kittle broke out too. Both Kittle and Ayuk had 8 catches.
Yes, I am. Ayuk was a player that I was interested in trading for if I could in leagues where it was available. Because same thing, we talked about other things. Let's face it, the first 4 games that they've played have been his preseason. Here's a guy that sat out all preseason and did nothing. And it showed. You could tell he had to get the rust off, how to get up to game speed, the whole 9 yards. I think you're going to have Deebo Samuel coming back. Again, the problem you're going to have with San Francisco is I don't believe until CMC comes back, until McCaffrey's back, you never know who the linchpin is going to be in that offense. So it could be Ayuk, it could be Samuel, it could be Kittle, it could be Jawan Jennings, even once these guys are back.
Very true. The only thing that I'm super confident in every week is you're going to get at least a decent game out of Jordan Mason, which is good because most people that have McCaffrey are relying on him right now. This was his worst game.
Correct. Do you think that this fumble, do you think this opens up maybe a little bit more of an opportunity for Isaac Roendo?
With how I've seen in the past how Shanahan handles his guys, I think he's going right back to Jordan Mason, and it's going to be fine unless this becomes a multi-week issue. So I'm not worried about one. If you tell me he fumbles again next week, then the flag's going up. I'm worried.
Gotcha.
But this was the first time I've seen Guerrero, I think, 5 carries this week. I think that's the most he's had, if I'm not mistaken. So, but I'm not worried about Mason as of now. And at least if you are worried about him, you're hoping CMC's back in 2 to 3 weeks. Obviously, that's not a given. That's our hope. And it's not someone you're relying on long term.
And the defensive end, it popped into my head. I knew I would think about it. It's my old age, so forgive me. I'm not as young as these guys that normally are doing the couch GMs. Dennis Gardeck. Gardek,
something like that. Yeah.
So, I mean, he's having a hell of a year. He's a defensive end linebacker hybrid, but a hell of a year for them. And again, they're making plays. So that's really all that matters when it comes down to that. I think the Cardinals are going to be a tough team, and really they did this without big games from Marvin Harrison Jr., from McBride. It was nice to see Murray scramble and run a little bit, but
that long touchdown at the beginning of the game was really nice for fantasy.
Correct. This wasn't a big offensive production. If you would have told me prior to this game that the Cardinals beat the 49ers, I would have automatically assumed it was a high-scoring game and somehow the Cardinals outlasted the 49ers. I would have never guessed that it was a defensive pitch and a shutout in the second half and, pulling it off with a last-minute win.
Definitely. I thought the Cardinals would have scored 45 and it would have been the Kyler Murray breakout game and he's the number 1 quarterback in fantasy the rest of the year. That would have been my thought. All right. Where are we back? Okay. I wanted to go, I know we went a little bit out of order here. Take you back across the pond to London. And the Jets offense. Yes. I don't know what it is. Like they look fantastic 1 week and then they look horrible for 2. What is your where's your panic level at on Aaron Rodgers right now? And I guess even his weapons, because it all goes together here.
20
out of 10?
Yeah. And it all stems to one person, Nathaniel Hackett. I think when Rodgers was in Green Bay and had his success, you had a younger more viable, quarterback, more spry, could run around more, could make more plays. He also had this guy named Davante Adams who maybe is or isn't getting back. We can only speculate there. You don't have that here. You're playing in one of the most microscopic, markets in New York. Everything is going to be super, overanalyzed. And I'm sorry, Nathaniel Hackett does not belong in the NFL. He's not an NFL coach.
But
But
he's
yet
like a Rodgers guy. It's like this is the situation where it's like Rodgers is basically vied for him. And is there a point where the ownership or the rest of the coaching staff says this isn't working and just overrides?
I will be perfectly honest, and I understand Rodgers was a Green Bay player. So, Cody, I'm sorry if this upsets you. I hope he fails. I hope he fails miserably in New York. And you know why? Because, again, it's about setting a precedent. Who does this man think he is coming into a team and saying, I want this coach, I want you to sign these players, and just go be a player, stay in your lane.
Mm-hmm.
What, all of a sudden now we have a quarterback who's going to be the GM, who's going to tell you, it was ludicrous to me from the start. And this has nothing to do with him getting hurt. I think they would have struggled just as bad pre-injury last year. Aaron Rodgers needs a serious ego check. And the fact is you've taken two premier players in Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall and rendered them basically useless.
Garrett Wilson is the one person that had a good week this week. Just to note that
22 targets. That's equally as ludicrous, George. Why in God's name are you throwing the ball 22 times to one player?
That's a great point. When you look at it, 13 for 101 and a touchdown looks great until you realize that he barely caught half of his passes.
At the end of the day, it comes down to it. And I said this all along. Did you get the win? He's not getting his team wins. It's excuses. It's week after week where it's, oh, well, we have to work on this. We have to try this harder. It's not Braylon Allen that's taking away from Breece Hall. It's not the other wide receivers that Rodgers has more familiarity with. It's Nathaniel Hackett cannot game plan an NFL offense. It's vanilla.
It is. And I think part of it has to do with, and I know Cody's made this point a million times, Rodgers is one of the best at changing plays of the line. And if you have a receiver that's on the same page and you can go up there with an idea and then basically draw up a new play at the line, that's one thing. And maybe this is why Alan Lazard is the one person that he brought with him that actually had some success, because them two have been together for so long. But
could be
you can't just jump in. That's not a sustainable thing to do.
Correct.
And obviously they didn't win a Super Bowl with it in Green Bay in years. So who knows, even if you do bring in, Davante Adams again, and you get Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers on the same page, and you have that three wide receivers that are all on that same page with Rodgers, who knows if it's going to even work then?
Well, and again, you're talking about players and their livelihood. So you're going to tell me Garrett Wilson's going to be perfectly fine if they trade for Davante Adams. So
Very
now
true.
You're taking that pie and you're cutting it up even more.
He's someone who's in his third year now, and he's starting to think contract extension. That's a great
Correct.
point.
So, he's not getting, and again, people are going to say he bitched, so he got force fed the targets. I don't know if that was the reason or not. The new thing this week's going to be, they already talked about the end of the last game. Aaron Rodgers had an ankle injury. There's probably not a single player in this league that isn't playing hurt or banged up or whatnot. And they're saying it won't keep him out of the Monday night game. You're telling me that he's not going to walk into a buzzsaw against the Bills next week, who just dropped 2 games in a row? So what's that going to be? It's almost honestly, for both these teams, it's almost a must-win game.
And I don't
can't
really
believe I'm
like
saying
where
that
the Jets are lined up in that either.
Yeah. I can't believe I'm saying that in week 6, but the Bills don't want to drop 3 in a row.
No.
The Jets don't even look like an actual NFL contending offense, at least not for the playoffs. So,
speaking of the Bills too, I mean, the only reason that they're going for, trying to avoid dropping 3 in a row is the Texans just hanging strong in there. The Bills almost had another great comeback, just like the Cardinals did, holding after the end of the first quarter, field goal in each of the last 3 quarters to the Texans. They held CJ Stroud down, and maybe some of that has to do with them losing Nico Collins to a hamstring injury. that offense looked completely different once you took out Nico Collins. And coming into the season, I will say I was wrong. I didn't think he was going to keep taking the stride to move up to being that true number one wide receiver. But now it looks like the offense runs through him at this point.
I wish that is one player I wish I had more of, because I have 0 shares of Collins. He really has proven he is an alpha wide receiver. We all know that Diggs is going to command targets as well. Really what comes into this with this hamstring injury is this would now be Tank Dell's time to shine, because that's what it was going to take for him to really have any type of fantasy relevance, was going to be an injury in some way, shape, or form. Now, whether that's the same type of return, I don't know, because I don't know that I see the type of alpha that Collins is that's on this team. But you're absolutely right, George. This was really kind of the Bills' game to, I don't know necessarily win, but it should have at least been going to overtime. I don't know what McDermott's play calling was there in the fourth. I don't understand why you're trying to throw the ball down the field. You're stopping the clock. You end up giving, the Houston Texans a fairly short field, and they kick a game-winning, field goal as time expires and knock the Bills off. If I'm the Bills right now and that ownership group, they really need to be figuring out, as much as, look, Khalil Shakir, I love him. That is somebody I do have a lot of shares of. And it's very evident that he's kind of the glue for the offense in terms of making it move. I don't think he's an alpha wide receiver, but he definitely is a weekly target guy. But there needs to be a better option for Josh Allen, because right now it really seems like Josh Allen is not right. And I don't know if it's because he needs better weapons. I don't know if they need to do something with the play calling. I think really what it comes down to is there's nobody that's stretching this field that's, putting the fear in. And I don't necessarily know who that is, but I would definitely be looking at the trade market at this point. Maybe it is Devontae Adams. I don't know that he'd want to go play in Buffalo. I know he has his list of teams to play for, but
You've
the
seen
one
Amari
thing,
Cooper there. There's other options that I
correct,
think could end
somebody.
up.
You're absolutely
Yeah.
right. Somebody, because you better believe it would not surprise me at all if Kansas City makes a move. So the people that you're competing against are going to do things to make their teams better. So you have to, keep up with the Joneses, so to speak.
But it's amazing to me how you have 1 week of Khalil Shakir out, and I'm not even saying Khalil Shakir has been fantastic, and then Josh Allen goes 9 of 30 passing, and no receiver gets more than 2 catches. It's amazing how quickly that just fell off. And Josh Allen is the only reason they're even in the game, and he wasn't good. And I don't think it was really his fault. To your point, there's nothing around him.
George, can you just say Khalil Shakir again? Because I love the way you say that.
Khalil Shakir.
Shakir.
Shakir. I say it with that
Yeah.
twang all the time when I'm just saying it at home. I didn't feel comfortable doing it on the podcast, but we got it out now.
There you go. It's definitely added to the podcast. Look, when you have Matt Collins and MVS, the law firm as your deep threats, and again, this goes back to front office. What are the Bills doing? Why are you going after MVS? Did he do anything incredible for Kansas City? He ran deep routes and couldn't catch them. And that's exactly what he's doing for your team. You can't tell me in the offseason there wasn't potentially better options. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you have Josh Allen, you're not going to be completely lost. It amazes me that Dalton Kincaid, we're frustrated with him at the tight end position, but he is warning so much attention from defenses. And again, it's why? Because your deep threat is Matt Collins.
Yeah.
It's
you're stopping Matt Collins and James Cook.
Correct.
So everyone on the defense is 15 yards off the ball or less.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the Bills are going to be fine. The good news is there's really nobody else in the division that's looking to be a massive threat right now. Again, it's a week-to-week league. We talk about the season being played in quarters. So, I think it'll be okay. But again, are your competitors, are the Bills who, are going to go up against the Chiefs, Kansas or not Kansas City, the LA Chargers, are these teams going to do things to make their teams better, at the trade deadline or whatever, through whatever methodology? Can you keep up with that? Because you see Houston getting better. They were good last year. They've made improvements this year. You sent them Stephon Diggs. So I will say I lost the prop bet on that one, though, because I thought for sure he would score a touchdown, and he did not.
Leading receiver, yes. Didn't get the
Yes.
touchdown.
No TD, though. But,
no. But,
all
right.
The thing I've talked about, we're talking about all these players, look, don't panic if you're a fantasy owner. We were talking about pre-show. I saw a really crazy statistic. The average players taken in the first 3 rounds of NFL fantasy drafts this year, it's only 30 to 40% of them are actually returning projected investment. I mean, between injuries, between players just not living up to the hype, it's a very, very weird year. And, as we head in here to waivers and we talk about that to try and help you out, keep in mind, I always say there are 3 phases to having a successful fantasy team. One is you have to draft a solid team. You have to start with something. 2, you have to manage your team. And right now it is more evident than ever. You can't just stand pat with what you have. You have to watch what's going out there. And the third's a little bit of luck. You need injuries to work out for you. You need bye weeks to work out for you, things like that. So don't give up, even if, dare I say it, even if you haven't won a game yet. Don't just punt on your season. See if you can reconfigure some things. Reach out in the chat to us. We can help you out. There's lots of other options that are out there too if you're not sure what decisions to make. But this is still a long season to go, and everybody is dealing with it. And if you're somebody who has not had this snake bitten season, that your draft, I'd love to see your lineup, because, tip of the cap to you if you have avoided, any of these, either injuries or just fantasy disappearances in 2024.
I think that whole entire thing is actually a great transition, not even just into waivers. We do have a fan question. If you want to answer a trade question, talk about not staying in pat. Rams House, thank you for chiming in here. We have 2 trade offers here. It's redraft, full PPR, super flex, start 8, 10-man league. Take a second to soak that in. First trade offer, we have Patrick Mahomes, Bijan Robinson, and Xavier Worthy for Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk, and Joe Mixon. Let's start there. Superflex has a lot of emphasis on quarterback. So immediately I'm kind of thinking I want the Mahomes side.
For Purdy, Ayuk, and Mixon.
And Bijan also, just like Mixon was fantastic. I have much more faith in Bijan. And I don't, even if like you have a situation where Worthy's going to be a potential wide receiver 1, I feel like he's very wishy-washy. He's going to be boom and bust. He's not going to be someone you're going to rely on all the time. But I think I like the other 2 on that side. Like I would stick with the Mahomes and Bijan for the consistency there, especially in a super flex.
Well, okay. So, anytime you have these like multi-layer trades where you have, 3 for 3, let's kind of break it down. So if you're looking at the Mahomes side here, as much as Mahomes has struggled, we do know what upside he brings. So I'm going to lean Mahomes over Purdy. Mixon and Bijan, as much as maybe Mixon comes back, he's dealing with health issues right now. I know Bijan, I don't necessarily know what they're doing in Atlanta there, but you have to think that there is an adjustment to the curve there. I still think Bijan, until it's all said and done, is going to be a top 10 fantasy running back this year. There's just absolutely too much explosiveness, too much talent. You got to remember Kirk Cousins there is still getting used to that offense and kind of finding his way as well. And you saw this past week how explosive that offense can be, although Bijan was the one player who didn't really benefit from it. But I'm going to give that over Mixon. It really comes down the other side of it. Your only upgrade is Ayuk over Worthy. So it really comes down, unless you are in, I don't know what side you are, Rams House, but unless you are just at a wasteland at wide receiver. So getting Ayuk for Worthy would be a massive upgrade for you. I think I'm staying with Mahomes, Bijan, and Worthy as the better side of this trade. So depending where you're at, the other, which I'm guessing, I'm going to guess that you have Mahomes right now. So
yeah, Mahomes, Shaheed with return yards, and Josh Jacobs for Lamar, Andrews, and Ridley. And I'll jump in first if you don't mind. Like the
Go
first
ahead.
thing I'm seeing here is Mark Andrews, and I have no interest in trading for Mark Andrews in any means. So when you say Shaheed for Andrews, I'm even thinking Shaheed. Add in return yards, I'm leaning further Shaheed. I like Jacobs better than Ridley. Lamar and Mahomes can be a wash.
I think it comes down to, for me in this one, again, in the super flex, I don't know who your other quarterback is. I don't know what the scoring is for your quarterbacks, but I will say right now, Lamar is vastly more potent than Mahomes. Mahomes, to an extent, really has become a game manager that has the ability to pop off. So I'm not totally out on Andrews, and maybe that's just me praying and hoping because I do have him in a couple places. But the talent is still there. It's still capable for him to go off. What I don't like in this is Ridley. I just don't touch. I don't trust the Tennessee passing offense right now. So what I don't see is you getting a running back back. I don't think Andrews is that valuable. So yeah, again, as much as I love Lamar, and Lamar is by far the best player in this trade, I don't think there's that dramatic of a difference between Lamar and Mahomes, although Lamar will be more consistent. Still staying on the Mahomes side of this trade.
Yeah, maybe I did oversell like Lamar, Mahomes a wash. I just think the other two pieces you'd be losing too much to get that upside
I
from
agree.
Lamar. Unless your quarterback scoring is something ridiculous where it's one of those leagues where your quarterbacks are scoring 60, 70 points and the rest of your team scoring max 20, 25, then maybe you're looking at a situation where, yeah, Lamar is going to be a big return there. And I do see he actually responded here. His other quarterback is Geno, which is doing completely fine right now. I
Yeah.
know it doesn't sound pretty, but like he's been decent.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I absolutely love Lamar. I agree with you, George. The other pieces in that don't equate enough. You need a little bit more out of that. Because it's, to me, essentially, honestly, Ridley and Mark Andrews. I know this is going to sound crazy. Those could be pieces that you drop by the end of the season, the way their seasons are going. So the
I've already heard
question there,
people questioning dropping Andrews.
correct. So the
So,
question is, are you willing to trade those three players for Lamar Jackson? That's how I would look at that.
and I think you can argue Shaheed maybe, but Josh Jacobs, no. Josh Jacobs has been
Yeah, no,
good
it's a
enough that
viable RB1.
he's very valuable, at least a running back 2.
Correct.
Running back 1 on some teams. All right, we're basically on the same page there. Why don't we talk about some waivers here? I'll go position by position, and I'll let you add in on top of what I've got here. I wanted to start a quarterback, and I looked at this as more of a streaming situation. I have 2 quarterbacks on my list that are both on the way up and have good matchups next week. So we just saw the success against the Jags that Joe Flacco had. Caleb Williams just had a great week against the Panthers. He goes against the Jags next week. Love him as a streaming option. And then the other is Kirk Cousins, still working back from his Achilles injury. He faces Carolina next week after a solid week this past week. Both of them are available widely. I think you could throw in your lineup right away.
So, yeah, quarterback's kind of getting interesting because obviously you're going to start seeing the waiver wire kind of dry up for that a little bit. We'll talk about these two. Caleb Williams, I'll give you the streaming option. He's definitely had some better weeks here. They seem to be figuring out the offense and what works for him in Chicago, and he has a very favorable matchup against the Jags. So, yes, I'll go with that. But I'm going to caution with you, I'm not there yet with him being a season-long starter.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, if Kirk Cousins is still available and you have a a sub-spec quarterback or whatnot, you need to get him on your team. Not only does he have a favorable matchup this week, he has a very favorable stretch of games coming up, and he has a very favorable playoff schedule as well. And he proved again this past week why Kirk Cousins, although he's not a sexy name in any way, shape, or form, him rocking his gold chain and driving his minivan, but the guy can put up fantasy numbers. He definitely can throw the rock around. He is still an upper level quarterback in the NFL. Definitely should not be on waiver wire at this point. Definitely a low end QB1 or a high end backup, depending on the way your league is. He's out there and you need quarterback help, or you're not 100% sure what direction your quarterback's going, go get him.
This has been the perfect year if you're someone who waited on quarterback, even if you didn't hit on the correct one, that like you've had plenty of options on the waiver wire. I mean, Jaden Daniels was probably drafted into the end of a lot of leagues, but he was available in some. Baker Mayfield's been out there. Kirk Cousins is out there. You can find pieces to put together a solid quarterback performance in your roster every week. Right. So I like being bullish on Kirk Cousins right now too.
I'm the proud owner of Jaden Daniels in every league that I'm in but one. And the important thing to know for there is I was drafting him not to be my starter. He was drafted as my backup. In almost every single league, he is currently my starter. And starting over the likes of Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott. So, again, you bring up an incredible point, George. Sometimes waiting on quarterback, if you know who you're targeting, really pays off.
And some years it hasn't paid off, but a lot of years it has. And this is definitely one of those years that it has. Moving on to wide receivers.
Yes.
Kirk Cousins' teammate, Darnell Mooney. The resurgence of Darnell Mooney. Where did that come from?
I've heard people pound their chest for Darnell Mooney when he was in Chicago and said he was going to be this great wide receiver. The interesting thing about it is I've heard people who loved London, who loved Pitts, but yet gave no love to Mooney.
Yeah, he's the one that I think a lot of people didn't even know he was on
correct.
Atlanta's
team
until like 2 weeks ago.
Under the radar signing. Nobody was talking about that. He hadn't really done anything either in Chicago. People just forgot that he was a really good talent coming into the NFL. It's being proven. So yeah, if he's out there, not only is he a fill-in piece for bye weeks and whatnot, he's a wide receiver 3 easily and could be a low end, starter for the rest of the year, either at wide receiver 3 or flex.
I'm not used to having more than one fantasy relevant, sometimes not even one fantasy relevant wide receiver in Atlanta. And we got to start changing that. With Mooney's going to keep this track up. And then Drake London has really found his stride this season as well. So Mooney's still widely available. Props to the couple people I actually saw that started him last week. I saw a couple people shout it out on social media. Props to you if you pulled that one off. I have Alec Pierce on here from the Indianapolis Colts, but I actually want to put another shout out to Josh Downs as well.
Correct. That's actually, I have Downs on my list. So
yeah, honestly, when you look at targets, Downs is the guy to go with. Alec Pierce has been a great big play guy, and he had maybe the catch of the year last week too. I don't know if you saw that one, but Downs is the guy really that I think long term is taking over that wide receiver 2, maybe even wide receiver 1 spot, because Pittman's not been quite there yet.
Well, this conversation, putting Pierce on there and then Downs, really brings up understanding and knowing your league. If you are playing in a PPR league, then yes, the edge goes to Downs here by a long shot. But if you're in a standard league where you want those big plays and the touchdowns, maybe you lean more towards Alec Pierce, who is going to have those shots down the field. That's basically his role within this offense. That's what it's always been. So it's, again, knowing what they bring to the team, what their role is, and understanding what they can offer you in fantasy when you're going to pick up these players. But I agree with you, George. I think Downs is the future there. And, I definitely think there was all kinds of rumblings coming out of camp this year that he was going to be the focal point of the passing offense. And I think it's really coming to fruition. You're seeing it now on the field.
I like it. And then finally, someone who I actually have stashed in a few leagues, and a couple people probably also do too. I have Jalen Tolbert on here, as Dallas doesn't have Cooks. He's on IR right now. Jalen Tolbert, I think he had 10 targets this past week. looks like he's becoming somebody that Dak's actually looking for.
Well, again, this is one of those things. If you guys have been following along with the Couch GMs shows that I've been on, we've talked about Tolbert before. I said a couple weeks ago, Tolbert is going to emerge as the number 2 wide receiver over Cooks. So hopefully you picked him up and stashed him already. There's a couple of other wide receivers we talked about as well. We brought up before Alan Lazard, still widely available in most leagues. Another guy in LA, the LA Rams, Whittington, I brought up before. Again, sometimes when we tell you these names, it might not hit the first week afterwards. Keep in mind, these are players that are thrust into action that weren't prepared, might not have been prepared for it. It might take them a week or two to get up to full speed, but there's a reason, that we identify these players. There's a reason why they are given the opportunity. We're looking at the opportunity they're getting. And it might not pay off right away. I'm going to give you another name that, this week had some big weeks. This week laid a total egg, but pay attention to Trey Tucker, wide receiver, Las Vegas Raiders. He is going to become the wide receiver 1 if they move Devontae Adams. He's basically been their wide receiver 1 right now. Now, in terms of, I'm saying wide receiver, target share, yeah, Brock Bowers is probably going to be the number 1 passing option, but that doesn't mean he's not going to get a chance. It's a guy that you can probably go out and get fairly cheap right now. And again, will probably pay dividends at least as a flex.
I like that name a lot. Yeah, exactly. Because that might be a stash and hold. But if Adams goes, Trey Tucker sees a lot more target share.
Yes.
I like that as a hold for sure. Let's try to get through running backs here a little quick. I don't think there's quite as many super exciting guys on the running back market. You can argue me if I'm wrong. Rico Dowdle saw 20 carries this week. If Dallas is going to have a running back breakout, it's going to be him. But I still don't love any of the running backs in Dallas. And the other person I want to talk about is Tank Bigsby.
Dowdle, I think, has proven at this point now he is the running back 1 in Dallas. So in that aspect, if he is out there, you're looking for running back help, he's a running back 1. He'll get touches. I'm with you, George. I'm not super excited about that position group in Big D. Tank Bigsby should not be on anybody's waiver wire anymore. He has usurped ETN. He is their running back 1. He is getting, far more touches on first and second down. Understand Bigsby is not a passing down back. They are not using him that capacity. I think he had 1 target this past week. But he's making the most out of his touches where he looked lost a year ago. All of a sudden, the light bulb has come on. He is making people miss. He is hitting the holes. So, yes, Tank Bigsby is a priority add. And, again, where we talk about this idea of being prepared for future weeks. You shouldn't be looking at your buys for this week. You should be looking down the road. And a great way to do that this year, 2 names that potentially could be out there who's, the starters are dealing with injuries right now. Jalen Wright came in after A-Chain went out with a concussion. I expect A-Chain will be back after their bye this week. So maybe he's on a go on. But Ty Chandler, Aaron Jones went down with a hip injury. Pay attention to what that is. It could very easily be a multi-week absence. And Ty Chandler is a absolute plug and play on a Minnesota team that is trying to pound the rock this year. And he's not going to be competing against anybody for those targets. He will become the lion's share running back as he has a pretty good role already. So he's on a bye this week. It doesn't help you this week, but if you have to fill spots the following week, it could be a pretty cheap pickup on waivers this week, or if you have fab budget that you're looking at to grab a guy that people probably aren't going to target if they're not playing this week. So always be looking ahead.
I like that a lot. And of course, it came the week that I dropped Ty Chandler to add Trey Sermon to start. That Ty Chandler steps in to start as Aaron Jones gets an injury midway through the game.
At least Trey Sermon paid off for you.
At least Trey Sermon paid off for me. I will take that where I can get it. Tight end position, the most frustrating position in fantasy so far this year. We're chasing points. The people I'm chasing are the people who had the most opportunity, and that's Tucker Kraft and Colby Parkinson. Any arguments?
Tucker Kraft, I don't believe you're chasing points. I do believe Tucker Kraft is going to have a week in and week out role in Green Bay. You saw it last year with Musgrave, unfortunately, there's a lot of injury to unravel there. But if you do the research and whatnot, Musgrave came in way underweight. He's still working back. Tucker Kraft has surpassed him. He is the tight end one there. You saw last year what role the tight end played with Jordan Love. This is not an anomaly. Tucker Kraft is going to be involved every single week. If he is out there, go get him. Especially if you need tight end help, which it's got to be at least 50% of the league is saying right now, I need tight end help. So Tucker Kraft, that's not a chasing of points. The rest of it, honestly, at this point, I would say if you were in a position where you're just not getting results, now is the time to start streaming options, looking at who matchups are and whatnot, because there are a bunch of names that are out there that week in and week out may pay off. The Gesicki's, Parkinson, Zach Ertz from Washington. They're not going to hit every week, but if you look for tight end friendly teams that they're playing, you might have to go. It's a lot of work. It's a pain in the butt. We all love to have the guy who's going to get you 15 points every week, plug him in and play, and it's great. But you can go that route. There are people that literally punt the tight end position and just stream week to week.
And this year seems to be the year to do that. The reason I have Parkinson on here, because I don't know if you actually know this fact, he's number 2 in the league in targets by a tight end so far this season. So opportunity. That's all we're looking for at tight end at this point. I wish he could do more with it too.
Yes.
But if he's getting opportunity, we're going to try to play it because it brings the ceiling up. And even if the ceiling's not high, the other person who we're going to talk about this Monday night game coming up too, and he's not playing, there's so many leagues so far that when he's playing, I'm okay with just playing Taysom Hill for no reason because the ceiling's there.
Yeah, when he's playing. But again, he's seeming to struggle to stay on the field this year. So again, people don't realize he's north of 30.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and he's taking running back carries and lining up a wide receiver, and he's getting beat up because of what he's doing.
Is Father Time catching up with him?
Probably, but I'm going to milk every fantasy point I can out of him until then because this tight end position is not helping. Couple streaming defenses before we get out of here. 2 I like this week. The Eagles defense has been brutal, but they're playing the Browns, and we talked so bad about Deshaun Watson already that you can play anyone against them. And then the Houston Texans, who a lot of people probably just dropped because they played the Bills. They're playing the Patriots. Good chance you can go out there and get a good week from them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to caution the people that are streaming defenses. I've always been very hesitant to just drop defense to pick a defense up. And I'm going to give a perfect example is this week. One of the favored defenses this week was Seattle. They were going up against the Giants that didn't have their starting running back, that lost their star rookie wide receiver. And what happened? The Giants came in and, ended up kind of putting a whooping on them. It wasn't a surprise game. The Giants controlled that game. So it's not always a guarantee. I will agree, though, with the Eagles for next week if they're available. I mean, they made Washington's defense look semi-elite. And I'll tell you right now, our defense is not elite. So thank you, Cleveland, for making us look like we're a competent defense. We still have a lot of holes there. We still have a lot of growing to do on defense. So, yeah, if I'm leaning towards one, I got to pick up a streaming defense. I agree with you. I'm going with the Eagles this week because I think the Eagles can give Watson and the Browns enough fits. And one of the things that any Eagles defense has always been big about is turnovers. So I think there's a good chance for that as well.
Got one more trade question before we jump into our Monday night preview. So I'll hit this up here. Chaka chimed in on YouTube, said, would you trade Devontae Smith and T. Higgins for A.J. Brown? It is a redraft PPR league.
Absolutely not.
I like the upside of Smith and Higgins better than one player as well. That is a steep price for one player.
Yeah, and in all honesty, you saw, don't get me wrong, A.J. Brown is elite. But you saw this past week, Higgins can be elite as well. And so can Devontae Smith. So the other thing too is A.J. Brown, there's no proof that he is still healthy. So, you're going after a guy who you don't know what you're going to get coming back. And George, you're our Eagles fan, correct? I don't have it in front of me. That was a hamstring, correct?
That was a hamstring. Exactly.
So I am always very, very cautious with hamstrings and calves for wide receivers because they can linger and they can linger all season long. So he might come back. It could very easily get re-aggravated. I think the two things here. One, you have two very high level wide receivers. You're basically taking a second and a third round wide receiver to get a first round wide receiver that's injured. So I'm out on that. I would definitely want the Devontae Smith and Higgins. Now, if you're the guy who has AJ Brown and they're offering you those two, yeah, I think I would jump on that. Be perfectly honest, because you're getting two very viable starting wide receivers for the price of one who, again, you don't know what you're going to get for the rest of the season.
You're going to get some weeks of Devontae Smith that are even better than AJ Brown, just with how
That's
the Eagles
correct.
defense rolls, and you have one receiver through bye at that point, and then you would have the extra guy to help you get through buys as you move through the season. So I like that as well. Let's talk a little bit of Monday night. We got Chiefs at Saints coming up, and as Cody likes to say here, if you're listening on the podcast platform the day after, you may sign off. Thank you for tuning in. Or if you'd like to listen in and hear how Marcus and I get this game completely wrong, we love that too. But here we are. There a reason? No, go ahead.
I just want to say the last time I was on a Monday and I predicted I was only a point off when I picked your Eagles to lose. So
yeah, it's losing by 2. We lost by 1. Is that what it was?
Correct. Yes.
Hey.
So my friends could not understand why I was yelling vehemently for them to go for 2 when they scored that touchdown at the end, because it made no sense except to me, who wanted to get his prediction 100% correct. Tonight's game, wow. On paper, you would think this is going to be the Chiefs. But the Saints have done a lot this year. And, Clint Kubiak, we've talked about it at length on this show, really has the running game working. And I don't think you look at the over under for this game at 43 points. I'm going to be really surprised if it's under. I think there's going to be points scored in this game. You have two explosive offenses. You have offenses that kind of want to open the game up. I think you're going to see potentially a little bit more of the vintage Patrick Mahomes tonight. I think he might have to kind of keep pace. And I think Rashid Shaheed is my sleeper pick for this game. I can see 1 or 2 deep touchdowns here. And I think it's going to be a fun game to watch.
I agree. I think it's going to be a very fun game to watch. I like the call on Shaheed because I think even if you get to the point where the Saints are down a little bit and they have to start opening it up, or this could be one of those games that's pedal to the metal from the beginning and that 43-point over-under gets blown out and we're at 35-31 in the fourth quarter, I could see that being a complete possibility. The Chiefs defense has not shown me enough to tell me that they can hold down the Saints. Unless you get that Saints team that played against the Eagles 2 weeks ago, which I think that was the anomaly. Even last week against the Falcons when they lost, they still look like a pretty solid offense. Down Taysom Hill, that's worth noting. Like I think he's the big piece that like you lose that versatility, but you got Alvin Kamara, who's actually more healthy than he was last week. And he's been the person who keeps this offense going. So seeing that Alvin Kamara is going to be more at 100%, I think that's going to really force attention onto him. And you could see a big game for Shaheed and hopefully Chris Olave.
Yeah, I'm less bullish on Olave. I think he's going to basically face McDuffie most of the night.
So this is me speaking from a fantasy term who has a lot of shares of Olave in dynasties.
Well,
please.
Hopefully, maybe. No, he's definitely going to pull the tougher matchup tonight. That's why I'm leaning more Shaheed. I think it's going to be Shaheed and Kamara from the New Orleans side, and I really expect to see a Travis Kelce night. So I think you're going to see him kind of get funneled targets because I don't see why
without Rice.
Correct. And, it's funny, we talked about with, them needing to make a trade or looking for another option. They picked up Juju Smith-Schuster. Do you know a player who's out there that I really think could potentially be a great fit for them? Hunter Renfrow is still unsigned.
Uncle Hunter himself. I'm not really sad to see he's not on a roster.
when you're looking at a slot receiver, I think he would potentially be a really good fit for them. So if they're not trying to trade and give up capital, I'm really surprised. I'm surprised that a team hasn't brought him in yet. That's kind of a little baffling to me. But I don't want to get off topic here. I really do expect it's going to be a Kelsey, and I think Kareem Hunt tonight makes his presence known for the Kansas City Chiefs. I expect a score out of him tonight. I think you're going to see he will be the focal point of that running game now, since Steele literally fumbled it away.
Even yet, I think Steele was kind of a flash in the pan. He's more of a fullback type back, which I'm not saying that can't work. That's worked plenty of times. But Kareem Hunt is more of your guy that's going to be your traditional first and second down back who can still get involved in the pass game. I know he's past his prime, but he's a better, well-rounded back that's going to make the Chiefs offense more dynamic.
Yeah, I think Steele had the chance to have it was going to be his backfield, but I think he literally had zero margin of error. It had to be. It basically he was going to play looking over his shoulder the entire time. He had to be flawless. He couldn't make any mistakes. He fumbled the first week. They still went back to him. He fumbled again. Andy Reid's not going to stand for that. He's going to go with the savvy veterans and P. Ryan and Hunt from this point forward. I'm not going to say Steele's not going to get carries, but he won't be a focal point. So,
you got ourselves a score prediction before we get out of here?
Sure, the refs by 3. No,
Chiefs. I'm kidding.
I do think the Chiefs pull this one out, but I'm going to take New Orleans on the points. I think it's going to be a close game, and I'm going to say it's the Chiefs by 3 tonight. So New Orleans covers the spread, who last I checked was at 5.5.
Yes, I've got 5.5 here as well. I got Chiefs by 8. Saints can't quite finish off a final drive. 38-30 is my thought. Pretty high scoring game.
I like it, George. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. But all right. Thank you all for listening in to the Couch Jams podcast. And thanks again to Marcus for coming in here. As always, make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at the Couch GMs, and watch us Mondays and Thursdays at 6:30. This is Cody's job. I have not done this in way too long. For Marcus, I'm George, and we'll see you all later this week.